Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, as you all are joining us. Thank you for joining us today for the second part of a three-part series with Hyperledger member company ConsenSys on DeFi and DAO. Today, I am very excited to be participating and listening to the session with Liz Mathew, who's the Executive Director at ConsenSys, and Clemens Wan, who's the Solution Architect at ConsenSys as well. You'll be hearing from them for the rest of the hour, and we'll also have some Q&A time. Today's topic is DeFi and DAO, and a deep dive into the unprecedented DeFi growth. So once again, welcome everyone. Let's go through a couple of housekeeping. First of all, here at Hyperledger, all are welcome. So please do abide by our requirements to be nice to one another and create a safe and welcoming community for all. There's some additional housekeeping rules I'd like to take you through. The antitrust policy, all Linux Foundation Hyperledger meetings that involve participation by competitors, we do want to conduct this under the antitrust and competition laws. If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask me during the event via direct message if you have any concerns with that. The session is being recorded, and there will be available in our resource webinar library as well as YouTube. So if you want to recatch a couple of things that the panelists speak about, please feel free or share with others. And we'll also be providing the slide download in the webinar listings as well as the YouTube library. So a couple other things, please stay active and get the most out of it. Use the Zoom features. There's a raise hand feature if you have any questions and you want to speak up. We can unmute you when the question and answer period comes up, and we're happy to allow your voice question to come through. If you prefer to ask questions via the Q&A, go ahead and enter your question into the chat at any time. I will be monitoring that, and when appropriate, we'll get those questions answered for you. And please feel free to talk and comment if you want to go ahead and say where you're zooming in from today. For example, I am zooming in from Napa, California. This is one of my first in-person events that I'm at, and I'm very excited. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniela Barbosa. I am the general manager of Hyperledger Foundation, let me try that again. I'm the executive director of the Hyperledger Foundation. I also serve as the general manager for blockchain, healthcare, and identity. So I recently took over as the executive director for Hyperledger. I've been here with Hyperledger Foundation for the last 4 years. For those of you who don't know what Hyperledger is, we're a collaborative and open source community that is hosted by the Linux Foundation. And we are made up of many projects as well as many projects as well as many communities, special interest groups, working groups, etc. So these educational sessions are really to educate our community and those that are participating in our community around the different projects. And today's project discussion, and we'll talk a little bit about Hyperledger Besu, but the greater Ethereum mainnet and the Ethereum ecosystem as well. I always like to start with a little history of Ethereum and Hyperledger because some people don't realize that both communities have been working together since very early. In 2016, ConsenSys actually joined Hyperledger when Hyperledger was formed. And since then, we've had a lot of different Ethereum-based solutions in our ecosystem, including Hyperledger Burrow, which was admitted with the EVM. And then we also, in 2019, had Hyperledger Besu, which was contributed as a code base by ConsenSys. It used to be called Pantheon. With the Pegasus team, and now is part of the Hyperledger community and one of the great projects that we have here. So once again, the Hyperledger community has been working very closely with the Ethereum ecosystem, the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, as well as the Ethereum Foundation, and over the last 2 years with ConsenSys as a board member, as a premier member to Hyperledger, and really, committing lots of resources and great community efforts around Hyperledger Besu. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. We have Liz Mathew, as I said, and I'll let them introduce themselves and their roles at ConsenSys, as well as Clemens. So Liz, over to you. And if you want to go ahead and share, I will stop sharing and you can.
Great, thank you.
Great, looks great.
Great. Hi, yeah, I'm Liz Mathew. I run strategic sales for the Americas at ConsenSys. Prior to that, I was running capital markets at another blockchain company, Securitize. And prior to that, I have a traditional background in fixed income sales, trading, and structuring. Great to meet you all.
Hey, and I'm Clemens Wan, I'm a global solution architect with ConsenSys around digital assets, DeFi, NFTs, and now DAOs, which I'll be talking about later today. And before that, I was with R3, and before that with Credit Suisse. Nice to meet everyone. So I'll do the first half here. The intro to this is about DeFi and DAOs, and what we want to emphasize is decentralized finance, or DeFi, is really growing up. It is no longer just copying traditional financial products. There's not just a reskinning or redigitization of financial products, but because of its composability and interweaving of all of these protocols, there's a lot of powerful new patterns that are really being created around these communities. And so let's just jump into it. What I see as DeFi and why I think it's incredibly interesting is a lot of people say this: composability. So atomic execution with composability means that I can not just call a bunch of APIs and hopefully in a centralized way it'll be executed, but I am calling a set of smart contract events, and those events can actually trigger multiple events that directly connect to the movement of value. And so atomic execution here means that all of it goes through or none of it goes through. So you can create very interesting things like flash loans, where one event, so one transaction, calls a lot of other smart contracts to create a MakerDAO collateral deposit contract, and then do a lot of other aspects of borrowing and lending before it comes back and repays that flash loan. And so with this, you're really adding in new financial primitives. It's imagine a bank that's able to do a structured product and code in that structured product and deploy it very quickly. It's no longer, limited by the legal team and by the structuring team and by all these other aspects. It's really just the coders being able to create a new company, fork some open source code, and do some audits, and then launch a basically crypto hedge fund or kind of new token primitive within months, rather than around all of this other overhead, for example. And so the patterns that we've seen is around lending and borrowing. So once you have stable coins, you can start to lend and borrow them. There is staking. The liquidity provision for staking is also quite interesting. There's a lot of swapping that's happening. MetaMask has swap features that go across aggregation, and there's a lot of yield and even liquidity farming and liquidity mining. So a lot of new buzz terms out there. It's already challenging the industry, and this slide is 3 years old, and still it looks fairly similar, except it's kind of expanded quite a bit more. Anything dealing with money, payments, investment banking for fundraising, exchanges with automatic market making, brokerages, insurance, payments, asset management with different token and token protocols with funds have already been created. And now it's even expanding into DAOs and how to create these decentralized autonomous organizations. And the reason why I think a lot of businesses are intrigued by this is because in a traditional financial model, you have a very high cost of operations. You're working with a lot of financial market infrastructure that has been well defined. And with the centralized finance or decentralized finance model, a lot of that is reduced into a blockchain protocol, which is also nonprofit, but also into the DeFi infrastructure that's out there. So imagine, I've worked for a bank where I had to have a separate computer, and we used to have desktops under the computer, and then it became a thin client where my desktop was just, kind of seeing a virtual machine that is now in the cloud. Imagine that, but for finance. So instead of having a whole financial tech stack in my company, I can just connect to these protocols. And that means that manufacturing cost goes to zero, right? I no longer need to go through that legal process in too much detail and kind of check with multiple parts of the company. The reduced time to market for an idea, such as a decentralized asset management protocol, can just be forked off of existing code. And also the number of intermediaries that are providing that connection between the issuer and the investors are now shortened. People can just pretty much purchase different tokens and swap between those tokens. This is an example, and this is kind of combining NFTs as well as kind of this new market space. The pattern for Uniswap version 3 for liquidity provider ownership is now issued through an NFT. So what you see on the left here is the actual NFT that you receive for purchasing a spread for being a liquidity provider. And what this means is it's attracting this software-based liquidity provider where you can run APIs to change and get in and out of positions. And that's super powerful because now there's reduced barrier of entry and you really get less sophisticated liquidity providers. I mean, I'm a liquidity provider, I'm market making, and I don't have any licenses. I just have a few tokens, but you can pretty much purchase these NFTs and use them to redeem for other types of tokens. And I want to mention that this isn't just open banking API access. I've been to multiple Sybos in the past, and people say, well, what's the difference between open banking API and DeFi? And I think that the composability of these smart contract calls really can't be beat by a single bank providing access to their funds and their limited resources. This is more about an entire ecosystem where all of it is open and all of it can be expanded upon from the coding side, from it being open source, and then from existing deployed contracts where you can cascade multiple events together. And feel free to look through, CoinMarketCap or Dune Analytics or DeFi Pulse or any of these to see kind of the market opportunity out there. It's kind of growing quite significantly. I have a few more minutes. The last thing I want to bring up are DAOs. These are decentralized autonomous organizations. And I really think that this is the next phase of where this is going. The DAO landscape is already quite expansive. And kind of the history of where we've seen, one of the earliest DAOs was with the Slockit DAO. And this was the creation, kind of the initial view of an ICO, more or less, right? This company was able to do capital formation. And so within ConsenSys, we had a token foundry team that helped with ICOs, right? Fundraising, basically using Ethereum as an open VC network in some ways, showing each of the contracts were able to be purchased and you can directly purchase. From there, with regulations in 2017, 2018, a lot of security tokens were created. And so we have also built a security token platform for a universal token that follows the regulation needed, backed by the legal documents and allocations for it. From there, the birth of stablecoins and kind of the new ideas of staking, even with Beacon Chain being kind of the proof of stake upcoming for ETH2, all of this has expanded in the past 3 years, I would say, starting with MakerDAO, with DAI as a stablecoin, then with Comp and Uniswap creating pools and all of these other patterns. Then with the NFT craze in the past year or so, I think the arts, games, sports, general consumer world, tying it to the physical world, a lot of these digital twin ideas, this has come around as the phase afterwards. And now it's kind of gone back into DAOs. So a lot of DAOs are starting to form where they do have very large bank accounts, right? These are a decentralized autonomous organization is basically a group that has a shared treasury that uses smart contracts for voting on corporate actions of that shared treasury. They issue membership tokens. Once you join some Discord or chat on discourse and start to vote on different proposals, and you figure out how to spend that money. And with that money, sometimes you create a portfolio of assets. There's Flamingo DAO, for example, that has a large fund that purchases different NFTs, and then you do different types of governance voting. The next step of that is likely linking to LLCs or corporations. And then hopefully in the future, you'll see DAOs that are in tandem. So as you have a website today with a domain, a DNS, you will likely have an ENS that points to a DAO, then points to treasury and different types of allocations. So I think that that's kind of the future that we're heading towards. And I know that we're kind of stuck in DeFi talking right now. And I think the consumer growth with NFTs will come very, very soon, if not already here. The DAO conversation will come after that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Liz, and she's going to present the next section.
Thanks, Clemens. If I could just take a temperature check to see among the audience, how many have used a MetaMask wallet? And just to get a gauge on how familiar you are with DeFi. Yeah, you can raise your hand. I think I just saw one. Okay, no, okay, great. That's a good number. Brilliant. Wow, okay. That's great to know. Okay, let me. So, yeah, thank you, Clemens, for the context and sort of setting the stage for really what we see in terms of industry trends in DeFi. I'm going to just take that information at the macro level and dive a little more micro to discuss what ConsenSys is doing in this space. So as many of you may know, ConsenSys looks at itself as a participant in the Ethereum ecosystem. We have a strategy to enable developers to build useful things on top of the Ethereum and Ethereum adjacent ecosystem. And that toolkit looks like Infura, Intelligence, Truffle, and MetaMask. So there's a host of tools that help developers both on the Web3 as well as the enterprise side add useful things to the ecosystem. On the top right is what we consider our user access, which so far has been predominantly retail. So MetaMask, as you are, many of you are aware, has 10 million monthly active users. What we are seeing happen this year on the back of DeFi summer last year is that the space is getting increasingly institutionalized, and therefore we've expanded our capabilities to look at solutions that address the more active user, solving for things like operational efficiency and compliance, really to address a more access from an organization perspective to DeFi. And so what we see is an overall flywheel effect of, as developers add innovation to this ecosystem and as users get involved, we are moving from a subject trust-based economic paradigm to one that is a more objective, mathematical based trust paradigm. And really that's why we find DeFi particularly interesting. And so, as many of you are aware, Web3 and access to DeFi is still cumbersome. You may use a self-custodial wallet such as MetaMask. On the organizational front, what we found is that users tend to move assets from a custodial wallet to then a hardware device to then a MetaMask wallet to access DeFi. And this is cumbersome. It has operational risk and time consuming. And so we've looked at this quite closely, and we've seen how the space is getting more institutionalized. And on the back of that, earlier this year, we developed a platform called MetaMask Institutional, which is really an SDK and an API built on top of the MetaMask retail wallet. So we went from an orange fox to a blue fox, which addresses fundamentally three user needs. One is, first and foremost, the broadest, most unrivaled access to DeFi. We have so one metric that we look at quite closely is the monthly active users on MetaMask. But the other thing that I'd like to highlight is that over the last 12 months, we've moved from access to cryptocurrencies to really looking at 17,000 and exponentially growing number of DeFi protocols that really have all kinds of different financial primitives. Some look a lot like what we have in traditional capital markets, but many are very novel ways at looking at financial engineering. And so we want to be able to provide that the broadest access to these financial primitives through MetaMask. Secondly, we address risk management, and really we're talking about two things here. One is facilitating a multi-user approval process in how they think about portfolio management. The second is providing a custody agnostic, but yet a custodial access to this asset class. And thirdly, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, is really thinking about the frequent DeFi participant, for a fund that is looking at multiple trades a day. Sometimes this process can be operationally inefficient. So we're taking a multi-step process down to something far more streamlined. And so in terms of what we have built, we've seen capital allocation stacks that address really an end-to-end lifecycle management across various asset classes. The institutional requirements are no different for crypto as an asset class. And we really look at this in terms of 6 buckets. Of the 6, I do, in the interest of time, want to highlight just a couple of things that we found to be incredibly well received by the industry so far. One is our compliance capability. So and this is a solution we built in-house, the ability to be able to query the health of a liquidity pool as it pertains to access to DeFi. So we have the ability to query all the addresses that go in and out of a DeFi pool, taking into account all the different stops that may happen along the way as we source liquidity in DeFi. And this is fundamentally different to a traditional style of compliance when you're looking at just A to B risk. In this case, we are looking at really all the stops that happen, and we think this is a far deeper analysis in understanding the health of a liquidity pool before you are about to transact. This has been particularly interesting for institutional and regulated capital as they look to increase allocations to DeFi. I will highlight also that not only on a pre-trade perspective, we also facilitate an ability to monitor on a regular basis the health of liquidity pools on a post-trade basis. So this is a very different construct to traditional markets where you go through the compliance checks, you understand who your counterparty is pre-trade, and then you execute and you're done. In a DeFi pool, it's different because the composition of the liquidity pool can change even after you have transacted. And that's a risk that we are aware of and want to be able to facilitate a constant monitoring of. Secondly, I'd like to highlight our capability. And so this is a financial primitive that's available on the platform itself, where, taking into account the more institutional execution requirements, you will notice that swap fees go from 87 basis points in the retail wallet to 5 for the MMI platform. But what we've find particularly interesting here is the ability to execute across all decentralized exchanges, looking for the best liquidity across DeFi. And so in combination of best execution through swaps and the compliance features, we've found that these two capabilities have been quite well received in the market so far. And lastly, this is something that we announced earlier last month, our partnerships with 3 custodial vendors. So we remain committed to providing a custodial but yet custody agnostic solution. And so we've partnered with really best-in-class custodial partners and custody tech partners. We understand that different tech stacks work for different segments of the market, as well as different trade strategies. And so I can shed some light into some of the integrations we have at the platform level, and also can also report that we are in discussions with other custody partners to increase the breadth of custody solutions available for organizations on the platform. And so I will just end by saying that, as someone that was formerly in traditional capital markets, I see this really exciting rewriting of TradFi as we know it. So really, when you think about the financial market infrastructure of today, you see buyers and sellers that are represented by investors, real money, as well as smart money, corporates, as well as banks and financial institutions being replaced by crypto funds, DeFi protocols, and DAOs. So, I heard, I think on a podcast somewhere that, crypto funds will soon be called as just funds, and every fund of today, they just don't know it, but they are going to become a crypto fund. And I think this is very true, given some of the points that Clemens highlighted earlier, that we are seeing, a rapid expansion in terms of just the availability of financial engineering and just the sheer access that brings to players in the market. And so when you're thinking about market makers, we are moving from an extremely concentrated, small number of market makers and investment banks to really an explosion of DEXs, automated market makers, and DeFi protocols, improving access to financial engineering, in a scale that really could not have been achieved by one particular organization on their own. It really talks to some of the boundless innovation that we're seeing getting built on top of our wallet today. And so just, going down the stack, thinking about custodial access, again, extremely concentrated market of today to then now being custody solutions being provided by both regulated, qualified custodians as well as custody tech providers. And so really down the stack, thinking about just at a fundamental level, how things of value get cleared and settled. We are moving from a framework of CSDs and FMIs to thinking about a cryptographically secure execution and consensus layer. So with that, I will stop. I'll stop sharing my screen in case anybody has questions.
And great. As a reminder, there is 3 different ways you can ask your questions. Number one is you can raise your hand, and I see Drew Tucker has his hand raised, so we'll get to him next. You can also put your questions into the Q&A box, and just use the Zoom features for that, or go ahead and add in chat, and we'll be able to answer those. All right, so, Drew did not have a question. He put his hand down, or maybe you answered it already. Great. Any questions?
I see Drew has, yes.
Yeah, Clemens, do you want to read that question and then your answer as well, or?
I was saying something else, but the question is, can this be done through private and permission blockchain networks? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, there are digital assets that have been formed on permissioned networks today, and they are right now, a lot of people are looking at bridging solutions and how to either have wrap tokens or some type of asset portability or reissuance of the dApps to multiple chains. And so just the world that we live in, the network is being overutilized. And so that people are looking at different L2 solutions for deployment, and new liquidity pools are forming around these areas. I also think that, the liquidity pools themselves will likely be contributed by institutions at some point, and hopefully that will be connected together by all of this. My other comment here was that we're seeing some companies directly working with all these large major players that we listed in the previous slides, and I think that's a good thing. But it also means that they are relying on these vendors, right? Their access and connectivity to cryptocurrency is now external to their core competency, and so there'll be another gateway. But it probably makes sense for them to, at some point, go into the hard part of thinking about how it impacts their treasury, how it impacts their custodial roles, and how it disintermediates some other existing roles.
There's a couple in the Q&A as well. Leonard Sotomayor asked, outsider question, what is the time range for a transaction complete?
Yeah, I can attempt to answer that. So there's when you talk of transaction, I mean, there's transaction at the protocol layer, and there's questions of settlement finality, and that is definitely being improved as we go from a proof of work to a proof of stake mechanism. I can also answer this from the context of a DeFi transaction, and in that case, it really depends on the consensus mechanism that you've agreed on ahead of time with your custodial partner. So, as in the context of an organization, there could be multiple approvers required for a transaction to be considered executed. So there's a multi-user signing, MOBN signing approval process at the execution layer, and then settlement finality is really done at the custodial level. So they will sign, submit, and broadcast to the mainnet on your behalf. That's a function of which chain you're on, if you're on a layer 2, and we've seen many scaling solutions and layer 2 solutions developed this year, and it's going to be a function of which DeFi protocol you're interacting with. I hope that answers your question or gives some color as to how we look at that transaction finality.
Yeah, I can also add that the benefit of blockchain is there's a lot of concurrent users that can form, and a lot of parties that can, that don't have to be onboarded. They can create wallets. They can just connect to and send transactions to the same shared ledger. And so a transaction completion for me is thinking about settlement in such a way that, the parties that say that they own it will then, when you're looking at the same ledger, see that, right? So that may take multiple blocks to do, but the transaction is being processed by your consensus layer, by the miners, the validators out there. With Ethereum takes 12 seconds. With other types of ledgers may take less, but note that this is just when you process your block, when you append your database with this new block. There are trade-offs of the growth of the size of your database, plus the different parties that then have to process more transactions. And so I think it's been optimized within Ethereum to 12 seconds. Other parties have different methods of consensus and different methods of growing their database.
And it also depends on, if you're using a scalability solution like rollups, and then that transaction throughput looks very different. And then, are you thinking about privacy around rollups? And so I think there's a number of variables that affect that. I see a question from Pala Bhaskar asking about permissionless and permissioned. And I think, so there's two ways to look, and I'm going to take the liberty of saying there's a difference between private and public, and then there's a difference between permissionless and permissioned. And so, so going from a private network to a public one, we have a number of solutions that help bridge that from a private network to a public network. Many of them are components that sit on top of our new business line, Quorum Blockchain Services, that enable that bridge. Now, as it pertains to my understanding of permissionless and permissioned, I think of this in the context of the requirement to have KYC'd liquidity pools. And so you are somewhat onboarded before you can participate in a permissioned pool. And in that case, we've not rolled this out, but I can share that we are talking about having financial primitives on MetaMask Institutional that help you literally toggle from access to permissionless DEXs to then access to only permissioned DEXs for execution, and similarly potentially for other financial primitives. So yes, we are thinking about making it as streamlined as possible to toggle in and out of permissioned pools and permissionless pools.
Yeah, I also added kind of to that answer that I typed in. I don't know where it went, but I answered it somewhere. It's just that a permission and permissionless network has different governance rules, and so if you created a permission network, you would have to do checks on the data that you've created, and sometimes there are other layers of privacy. For example, within Quorum, there's different privacy groups that are created, and with that, you would have to check with all the participants that when you make it permissionless, that it's okay for other parties to download that data. And the process for making a permission network permissionless after you get all the checks is likely informing a group and then telling different parties about the token that is created. And this is also a hard part, is that permissioned networks usually remove gas. And I think permissionless tokens, the reason why you are a validator or you're hosting shared infrastructure is because you have incentivized mechanisms for running, mining or being a validator or staking. And so that evolution is pretty hard. It's hard to create a proof of stake network, for example, out of nowhere. If Ethereum or Bitcoin started off as a proof of stake network, it wouldn't have worked out, right? You need value that comes from proof of work to run the network. Any other layer twos that are connecting to ETH or using ERC20 fundraises as a starting point have to have that value before they can have a token floor valuation of their protocol token, for example. And so if you have a permission token and you've removed gas and there's a bunch of tokens that are allocated in the Genesis file to your core creators, then that kind of messes up the economics and tokenomics of it. So it's hard to kind of just say, oh, well, we were a permission network and now we're permissionless and now we have all these tokens and now we have a faucet and all these things. Not many people would want to use it unless there's some type of backing of it or some way to fairly evaluate the token value.
I'm going to read the question from Wei Cheong. Hope I'm pronouncing your name right, but since MetaMask Institutional is changing from the orange fox to the blue fox, does that mean that we are expecting to see a new MetaMask mobile app version that traditional institutions can white label for their institutional investors? This is a really interesting question and one that we think about quite deeply. So we do have, so the Blue Fox is it's not a white label solution. It's really one that is really aiming to be a market aggregator of DeFi. I do see the appeal for a white label solution that enables users from Web 2.0 to interact with the Web 3.0 backend, which is what MetaMask as a wallet fundamentally does. And so I do see that there is some applicability for that type of use case. Nothing that we can share publicly right now, but we're definitely having discussions around that about how do we enable the next next set of users that may not find intuitive the on-ramp experience that is native to Web 3.0.
Okay. Looks like there is a question from YouTube as well that was put into the chat by Igor there, which do you want to take that one? There's two of them. Let's go in the two in the Q&A first, and then we can go over to the YouTube question.
Yeah, I see Clemens is typing an answer to Drew's question. I don't know, Clemens, if you just want to speak.
I think Clemens dropped.
Oh, okay.
Right,
okay.
he had to drop. So I think he dropped.
Dropped midway typing an answer. So Drew's question is trying to understand how permission chains can be used as a database. Would love to hear how these chains potentially disrupt cloud services. Oh, wow. So yeah, now this is, there are so many ways to answer this question. So, Drew, could you clarify what you mean by permissioned chains per se? Are you talking about Quorum, or are you talking about some of the layer 2s? Because the way my mental model of this is that, you are going to require to host these nodes. And so you are going to have the need for a cloud service to host, and usually it would be multi-region, multi-cloud solutions to be able to host nodes in a permissioned chain. So I don't quite understand.
So he just clarified layer 2. So let's take, for example, Hyperledger Besu, which is the Quorum Besu client on a layer 2. As a permission chain.
Yeah, so
I think your answer is still the same, right? You still need to host a node.
Yeah, and most of the layer 2s I see are permissionless, and therefore, yes, there's a less reliance on a cloud service for that, but you're still delegating it to a network of nodes that then have to host that service. But it'd be interesting to see, like, we are speaking to certain layer 2s that are permissioned, and it'd be interesting to see how they are approaching this, but I don't have any more color to add on that.
I think one of the other questions, Liz, that came over from YouTube, right? And it says, how does Hyperledger, it's Hyperledger, how does Hyperledger Besu deal with slow speeds and high transactions of ETH? Maybe you can address some of that as, because I think it's related to, it's kind of the layer 2 approach as well.
Yeah, so no, it's a great question. So so there are a couple of scaling solutions that we've seen develop in the market today, right? So there's there are side chains, there are layer 2s, there are optimistic rollups, there are ZK rollups. ConsenSys has built their own ZK rollup, and we're particularly proud of this because of the way they address both scalability but also permissioning. So I would urge you to look into our ZK rollup solution, earlier known as Sumo, but now rebranded to be ConsenSys rollups. And that's one way that we address the scalability solution. And the second question around, does Hyperledger know ETH 2.0 will be a successful transition? Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to predict the future, but I think given some of the news that we are seeing happen. So, I think last month they, community of developers were able to run successfully the DevNet environment to look at proof of work and proof of stake coexisting and being able to run that transition is extremely encouraging. The latest guidelines we're getting is that we think the merge will be scheduled for end of Q1, early Q2. Of course, I don't know any more than what I read on this point, but we do feel extremely optimistic about a successful merge and transition.
I see two questions there around energy and
yeah.
Do you want to address that, or do you want to address the DeFi space one first and then go back to the...
Yeah, so the question from Leonard about the carbon footprint, so I'm not an ESG expert by any means, but what from my understanding is that as we move from a proof of work to a proof of stake mechanism, we are actually achieving a 99.95% energy improvement. And some of the numbers I've seen point to the fact that the energy consumed by a node running for a day is equivalent to 4 minutes of streaming Netflix. So, I think we're going to see a huge improvement as we move from proof of work to proof of stake. And I think Balabaskar's question is the same, somewhat the same. Which chain up, I'll say Ethereum. I'm biased there to say that. But,
yeah, I mean, I'll add, I know there's some interesting work going on with Hyperledger Besu, specifically on like NFT projects like Palm NFT that is running, Besu, Hyperledger Besu as a layer 2. And for, a lot of the sustainability, environmental concerns that a lot of the big players want to get into the NFT market, but do as well. So I'll find a link and put that into the chat.
And addressing Shane's question, as the DeFi space is evolving exponentially, but TradFi is so regulated, I wonder your views on how the last will catch up. Yeah, so I think, I don't think the DeFi space is immune to regulations. We absolutely welcome additional clarity around regulations. We think that overall there needs to be a framework in place that protects consumer interests, but at the same time provides a wider access to financial innovation. I think the existing TradFi construct with all its legacy tech has become extremely concentrated and therefore is not accessible to a wider audience, be it retail or institutional. And so, we continue to work closely with the regulators to achieve that goal of increased access and at the same time protecting consumer interests and marketplace integrity. So, I guess the question is less about how will TradFi catch up. It's about, how do we get, more as regulated capital is moving to DeFi, how do we make sure that we have the right tools and framework to make sure that this regulated capital can still comply with regulations? And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question. And I know there's a follow-up on, there's a lot of uncertainty on the legal risks in innovating within DeFi. I mean, we're taking a compliance first approach. We are solving for a know your counterparty KYT framework as it pertains to DeFi. We're also speaking with a number of participants to solve for things like KYC and shared an identification process. I do think that as we look at next year, we're going to see a far more number of solutions that address identity and compliance overall. I know there was a question in the chat. So from Enrique on DAOs for collectibles and investments. And do you see DAOs for investing in real estate? or NFTs representing real world assets. Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, I'm not, I think the evolution of DAOs is still very early. We often get asked about how can we connect real world assets to DAOs. To me right now, DAOs are at a very early stage of evolution where they really represent the crypto native corporate, as you know. Absolutely from a technological feasibility standpoint, there's no reason why a real estate asset isn't represented by a non-fungible token, given real estate is fundamentally non-fungible. And I know that there have been a couple of DAOs that have looked to address that. And I wouldn't be surprised to just see more of that happen going forward. Which difficulty did you face in communicating Web 2? Yeah, it's really interesting, right? So, on one hand, you have an industry of fairly large regulated players that have leaned into crypto as an asset class. And by that, really, we're talking about centralized exchanges or regulated custodians that are plugged into centralized ways to buy and hold crypto assets. And what's happened over the last 12 months is that, DeFi, so decentralized exchange has now become $100 billion asset class. And what we're seeing happen is that even the most early adopters of crypto as an asset class are finding that the access to DeFi. So I have to make sure that you appreciate the difference here. So through a centralized exchange, you can buy a comp token or an Aave token, but you can't lend or borrow or stake or hedge or swap these, among all the DeFi protocols through a centralized exchange. And so I think there is an appreciation for just the far richer innovation that's happening in Web 3.0. We are speaking with a number of Web 2.0 players that are both, in the crypto space and out to think about how do we provide that connectivity. I think there are some things that still need to be solved for, like the user experience, things about gas fees and the volatility around that, probability of execution. So there's a number of things that DeFi as an industry needs to solve for as it matures. But, I'm quite optimistic that it's only going to get better.
Okay, great. Any additional questions? Please go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A, or raise your hand and we'll do a voice chat. I do have a follow-up question to your comment that you just made, Liz, which is, this market is moving very fast, and traditionally financial services don't move very fast. So what are you seeing? You've been in this business for a while. What are you seeing is different? How does it feel different? Just some insights from the field would be fantastic.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think it's just so radically different, right? And that is to be expected, right? So we, in the early 2000s, when we went from an over-the-counter style execution to a voice-based execution to a chat-based one, or a digital form of execution, it wasn't the same teams that did voice and OTC that reskilled to manage a more digital form of execution and distribution. It was a new team with a very different skill set that managed that. And then with time, we went from 95% voice and OTC and 5% digital to the other way around. And we see that right now, even in TradFi. And so it isn't unexpected to see that TradFi and Web 2.0 companies per se are probably not the first to lead this change. It's a very different kind of user base that has leaned forward, and because this is it's gone through a 10x growth in the last 12 months. So you see funds, centralized, exchanges, custodians, trading platforms all try to, fashion something proprietarily built to manage this. And it's a very fragmented market today, but one that we think will mature in the short run, because we get almost 5 funds a day calling us, asking us for a industry-wide solution that gives them access to DeFi on a daily basis at this point.
I think, and your point on reskilling, especially there's a lot of developers in our community as well who are looking to to make sure that they have the skills needed to build the new infrastructure going forward. Excellent. There's a question on regulations. If you want to take that one very quickly, because Mohammed Tari had asked that twice, and then we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah. So it's I would say all the regulators are voicing opinions on this. I mean, we just saw the guidance, I believe, from the SEC out last week on stablecoins. So I do think that between the OCC and the CFTC and the SEC, that there is an increased engagement from all the regulators in trying to understand this place and trying to give us guidance. I think we are in a better place in terms of getting clarity, but still, I don't think there's enough. And so we'll continue to see more of that going forward. But I don't think, it's so far encompassing. So you've got a technology that's affecting consumers and retail investors, and it spans from retail financial products to copyright issues as we look at NFTs, and then real estate, land rights. It's really broad at the retail level in terms of the scope of coverage. And then at the institutional level also, I think it really spans the gamut of many regulatory oversights.
All right, well, I think that wraps it up for today. Liz, thank you so much. And please do thank Clemens as well when he joins. I think it was a fantastic session. And there's, as I kind of lead myself into, there's a lot of opportunities specifically here at Hyperledger with Hyperledger Besu. There's a lot of training for those of you who are interested in, developing and learning more about Besu. There's a free online self-paced course that you can take, and you can enroll that via our website. So the community is very open, always looking for new developers, users, and contributors as well. So please do join us. A couple of other things upcoming for Hyperledger. We will be doing a workshop series on identity. I saw a question in the chat actually about identity. It's a very important aspect of what we're building and what we need to do. So we have some projects here at Hyperledger that are focused on digital identity, including Hyperledger Aries, Hyperledger Indy, and Ursa as well. But we'll be doing some workshops. So we welcome everyone as we get those announced to join us for like a multi-hour deep dive for developers and users of those projects. A couple other upcoming webinars. We have 2 member webinars that are coming on November 10th. Poste Italiane is going to be talking about identity, the path to SSI, a proposal from Poste Italiane, what the identity community is doing in Europe with using Hyperledger technologies is really fantastic. So, if you're interested in identity, do come in and watch that one. It should be a great webinar. And then on December 1st, we'll also be doing a webinar from Splunk talking about Hyperledger Fabric Security Monitoring. So that will be another session, hands-on session as well from Hyperledger member Splunk. We have a lot of content available from our global forum, which happened this year virtually in June. So please, all these topics were addressed and many more. And please do find the sessions on the YouTube channel and let us know what you think by leaving some comments. Lots of ways to get involved involved in the Hyperledger community, you can send us emails, you can go to our wikis. We are an open community. Everyone is welcomed. We're here to build a strong enterprise blockchain community across multi ecosystem. So please do join us. Liz, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how do they go about doing that?
Sure. Yeah. So either by email, I'm just going to type my email address here. It's elizabeth.mathew@consensus.net, or you can find me on LinkedIn or on Telegram. Yeah.
Great.
My Telegram handle.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Liz, thank you for putting your email and your Twitter. Thank you. And there is another ConsenSys, the third part of the ConsenSys series on Ethereum Mainnet is coming with Joanna Powell on layer 2 and NFTs. So that is happening as well. So please do register for that. Or actually, if you're registered for this one, you'll get notification of the other one. And we look forward to seeing everyone there. Great. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Oh, no.